Hello and welcome to America in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. Americans across the country commemorated the 23rd anniversary of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks that killed 2,977 people. Joining me to discuss this and what it means today is Casey Harper, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Center Square. Casey, let's start with the commemoration. You're much younger than I am. What are your memories of that tragic day?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I was much younger, but I do have vivid memories of it. I remember watching it on TV. I remember the general feeling. I remember how others reacted to it, the soberness of it. It is one of the at that point in my life, one of the most serious thing that had ever happened. And it was kind of you got a lot older in a day. I think. I was still in grade school, but you had this sense of unity. I remember that, of course, it was tragic, and I'd never seen anything like what happened to the towers and the Pentagon before. But there was a sense of national unity afterwards that I had never experienced either. And I don't think we've experienced since, Dan, but a sense of where we were all Americans, where we all cared for one another. People were more friendly, more people were in church. People were much more patriotic. The radio stations were not talking about, gossip or negativity. They all had kind of a unified tone and were playing more hopeful music. It was just kind of a surreal time. And then, of course, the war came soon after that, and that has all its own story to it. But it's a day of tragedy that led to a time of unity after that we really haven't seen since.
Yeah, agreed with you. I was in the news business at the time, editor of the newspaper in Indiana, but I happened to be on vacation that day, that entire week. Well, until September 11th happened. My wife and I had our 9-month-old son, our firstborn. We were in Cleveland the night before, September 10th. We took our son to his first baseball game, the Cleveland Indians. The next morning, my wife and I were in the hotel, getting ready to pack up and head back when we heard the news, turned on the TV, watched probably the first hour of it in the hotel room, and then got in our car and listened on the radio the whole drive back. And surreal is really the only term I can think of. It was a long drive back and a quiet drive back as we listened to the news on the radio. 23 years later, we still commemorate that day. Remember the victims, nearly 3,000 of them. Of course, you mentioned we got into two different wars over 9/11. Just got out of Afghanistan a couple years ago. Unfortunately, that was tragic. Our exiting of Afghanistan. Several military members and others were killed in the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. And now today, with the ongoing border crisis, many national security experts, former Border Patrol chiefs, are telling us that the country isn't any safer than it was on September 1st, 2001. More than 12 million people have illegally entered the country. Of those, more than 2 million are what's known as gotaways, those who successfully illegally cross into the U.S. without being apprehended, without being arrested. And we don't know who they are, where they are. We do know that more than 1,000 individuals on the terrorist watch list have been apprehended entering the country. But what we don't know is how many of those gotaways were or are on the terror watch list. Our Bethany Blankley, a reporter, border correspondent, wrote a story this week talking to 3 separate national security experts about it and their concerns. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, a theme after 9/11 became American safety. There's a real sense in which we never thought anything like this could have happened, and we were totally unprepared for when it did happen. And even the response, so many firefighters and first responders were killed trying to help. And even, it wasn't just the Twin Towers. It was, the Pentagon, which is the symbol of American defense and the defense, infrastructure. And if they can hit the Pentagon, I mean, who is safe? So there's a real question about what is safety in the U.S. And so you saw the TSA, for example, crop up after that. And, the experience at the airport became much more laborious and security focused. You're taking off your shoes. I mean, there was a time before that. People may not remember, but there was a time when going to the airport was like getting on the bus or something, getting on the train, but no longer. And then, of course, widespread surveillance of Americans began after this in the name of safety, and the controversy over that, the ability for phones, which cell phones were really coming into their own at that point, and there was no iPhones, but they followed soon after. And there was just a sense that maybe widespread security was necessary, or surveillance, at least at some level, could be justified for American security. So we've been in this ongoing conversation about security, but recently that conversation has died down and other political themes have followed. And it's kind of led to this weird juxtaposition of things that are really oxymoronic. For instance, we've given the government power to monitor your cell phone at will. We know they can do that even if it's turned off. So they can and do spy on Americans in the name of security. And yet the southern border is totally unprotected and wide open, right? We have to go through extensive lines and take off our shoes to get on airplanes, but anyone from any country can simply walk across the southern border, and they do to the tunes of millions right now. And so, we're busing in or flying in people from like these Haitians that have been flown into the Midwest by the thousands into communities and seeing, the consequences of that. So, American safety is in a new stage, or even, some of these overseas wars. I mean, possibly provoking World War III with Russia, with some of our decisions and how that plays into American safety. So it's a new era. The idea of American safety doesn't have that same pull as it did. It's led to some weird policies, Dan. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, the chaotic and deadly withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan was in some ways a sort of an end to that 9/11 season, because we've been in Afghanistan for more than 2 decades. And I can't imagine having, of course I wasn't, but I can't imagine having been a soldier there, because the Biden administration, it's one thing to leave, which presidents of both sides promised to do. But the Biden administration did not just leave Afghanistan. They handed the Taliban Afghanistan after all this time. And it wasn't, there was no Afghanistan government that was even able to put up a fight for a month or a year. It was immediately handed back to the Taliban, which is kind of a sad ending to a sort of sad season in American history.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Casey. You mentioned up top, the unity that all Americans felt in the hours and days and weeks and months after the deadly terror attacks. We don't really have that now. Of course, we're in a presidential election season. The country seems more polarized than ever. But we remember. Let's leave it at that. Thank you for joining us today. Casey, listeners can keep up with all the national news at thecentersquare.com.